Please turn to page 156 for cause and effect. Cause and effect is all about change. This is when you are going to find out why and how something changed, to explain why an event happened or a condition changed. It's all about figuring out what were the issues, what were the events, what were the reasons for the change. It is a deep thinking activity in which you need to guide the students to show them how to identify the reasons for change. And in this case, we're going to use our graphic organizer. The students have a piece of paper, you would have a piece of paper, and together you would make this organizer. Maybe the first couple of times you do this activity, you would only model it in front of the children, and then the children and you would do this activity together. I have to emphasize, though, this activity is about children analyzing information to identify change, which means they need to know the information really well. You're not going to have kids successfully analyze information that they don't even understand. So if I'm in a unit of study and I'm in social studies or science, I've read some stories in language arts, and I want to do a thinking activity using cause and effect, meaning identify why there was change in this information, why a character changed in a story, why in science the surface of the earth is constantly changing, why an event happened in social studies. I'm trying to identify how and why that change occurred using the cause and effect deep thinking analysis. If I don't understand the story, if I don't understand information about the surface of the earth, weathering and erosion and volcanoes, if I don't understand all the different events that led up to the Revolutionary War, then I'm not going to be able to analyze that information to figure out what caused the change. So, cause and effect is a thinking activity that we will use once the children are well versed in what they are reading about or studying about. Let's get started on all the steps that you would walk students through so that they can think at this level. Remember, you and the students together will be doing this activity, but eventually you may want to give them some sort of a cause and effect prompt where they need to identify change from information they've read, and maybe in table groups they'll do this activity, or in partners. And eventually your goal is for them to independently be able to think using this type of analysis. If you look on page 156, you will see we have our cause and effect organizer with keywords and also why we do cause and effect to identify change or why an event happened. Below I have this blank area, which we will do a cause and effect organizer. But before we do that, let's go to one that's already been completed so I can walk you through the steps. So on page 157, we have a completed organizer with writing below. This organizer was done on plain paper with a class, and they had been studying about different famous Americans. One of the famous Americans that they studied about was George Washington Carver. They learned a wealth of information about this famous American. So at that point, we were ready for the analysis of this famous American. On the sheet, what you will see is we had our line straight across on the top and the line on the bottom, separating out the intro, the body, and then the conclusion. So we built an organizer. Up on the top is our intro with our S light bulb, where we're going to use our secret formula to create our big idea. What are we analyzing in this cause and effect organizer? Then we went to the body and we made 2 lines. We made the 2 lines so we had 3 boxes. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then on the bottom we had our conclusion, which was S light bulb. So far, what's similar to all the other informational type of organizers is the intro and the conclusion, in which we're using the secret formulas. In the introduction, SS light bulb, and in the conclusion, S light bulb. What's different? The body. The information in the body is organized in such a way so that we can do cause and effect, analyze for change. Let's now look and start at the top. The first step that we would have when we fill in this organizer is to identify the big idea. So at the top, we have our introduction in the middle of the body, and at the bottom, we have our conclusion. We're going to start with the introduction, the big idea. And because this is a paragraph, it's going to be a topic sentence. Our big idea has SS light bulb. So the children and I write down SS light bulb. What is our big idea going to be about? Let's start with the middle S, the subject. Subject, who or what are we talking about? And we wrote down George Washington Carver. And I may even yell out, why did I capitalize George Washington and Carver? And then the kids can yell out, because it's a proper noun. It's always a great idea to have those different types of mechanics embedded in your organizer. We have George Washington Carver. Let's go to our big idea. What information are we going to write about George Washington Carver? We are analyzing him. We are showing that he caused some sort of change. So what are we looking at in our big idea? We're identifying that he caused change. At that point, I'm going to have the boys and girls talk to each other. Boys and girls, he did some things that caused change. He was a famous scientist. What did he do that caused change? And we together came up with his research and discoveries. And what about them? Caused change in the field of farming. That is such a great idea. Right there, we are now taking this famous American, George Washington Carver, and we are saying that his research and discoveries caused change in the field of farming. So that is a great big idea. That gives us a reason to go to this deep level of analysis. Let's go to the first S, setting. Is it important to identify the time and location for this information? You bet. We decided that the setting, the time and location is important. So we have around 1914 in the southern part of the United States. After we label all that information, we go back and orally rehearse it to make it sound like writing. At this point, I may model several different ways. Have the students then, in partners, in table groups, practice how they would say this introduction, this topic sentence for this paragraph. So I may say something like, and notice how I'm using motion so that I bring in all those learning styles. Around 1914, in the southern part of the United States, George Washington Carver, a famous American, had researched and made important discoveries which changed farming forever. Which forever changed farming, which impacted and changed farming. Ooh, look how I keep going back and I keep changing how I'm saying this. And I make sure I do that with the kids. And the reason why is this rehearsal is all about planning how you're going to say the sentence, meaning I'm revising through my language. So I may say it again. George Washington Carver, a famous American. Ooh, look, I'm starting with the subject first. I don't need to start with the setting. George Washington Carver, a famous American, made many important discoveries through his research that impacted farming forever in the southern part of the United States. Or I could say to the children, it impacted farming, but not only in the southern part of the United States. So I put that setting in the wrong place in my sentence. I have to make sure my setting is near the beginning, because when I say it impacted the farming in the southern part of the United States of America, that's not true. It impacted everyone throughout our country. So where I place that information makes that sentence sound different. So I need to point that out to the kids. That's really critical if you do that on the spot. So where do I need that setting? I need it away from the big idea. All right, let's start again. In the southern part of the United States, around the year 1914, a famous American named George Washington Carver made many discoveries through his research that impacted farming forever. That sounds wonderful. I have the children turn to each other, they start talking, and they plan out how they're going to say the sentence. After we've identified our big idea, what are we going to do? We're going to go to the body. And in the body, I have already those 2 lines. At this point, I'm going to say to the boys and girls, we have a special hand sign for us to figure out how to fill in the information on the body for cause and effect. Let's use our hand sign, our memory device, to tell us how to fill in this organizer, because it's difficult sometimes to figure out, how do we do this organizer again? Let's go back to our hand sign. And our hand sign is before, after, what caused the change? Let's do that again. Before, my hand is fine. After, ow, my hand hurts. Go to the middle, what caused the change? So that is our hand sign. And at that point, I say to the children, all right, boys and girls, we have our 3 boxes. What are we going to label the first box? Before. So we label before. What are we going to label the middle box? So let's go back. Before, after, what caused the change? What's the middle box? Change. What is the last box? After. Now that we've identified, we have our before the change, what caused the change, and after the change, we will fill in the organizer. So we say, how do we fill it in? Let's go back to our hand sign. Which box are we going to fill in first? The before. So before the change, we want our readers, when we tell them about this change, how he caused so much change for farmers, we want to go back and say, well, what was it like before this change? What was happening before? And at that point, we're going to draw some cotton, some corn, and show how cotton and corn had depleted the soil in those areas. So farmers were farming crops like cotton and corn, and it took so many nutrients out of the soil that the next crops that they were going to plant weren't going to grow as well. So the soil was being depleted by these crops, and farmers were losing money. At this point, we have what was happening before. Farmers grew too many crops that depleted the soil, like cotton and corn, and were losing money. Again, we'll go back and we'll rehearse this whole paragraph now that we have the topic sentence and one of the first parts of the body. After we filled in the before, we've orally rehearsed how to say it. Then we go back to our hand signs. I have the before. Now where am I going to fill in? The after. So we go to the after box. After the change, what was happening? In the after box, we're showing how crops flourished and how farmers made more money. We went from before, growing crops that depleted the soil, farmers were losing money, to after, crops were flourishing and farmers were making money. So we have our before and after. What caused this change? What were the reasons, events, or issues that caused the farmers to go from having depleted soil to having crops that flourished? Then we go to the middle and notice we have 3 key reasons that caused the change. And that's when we're together as a group. We're identifying all these different boxes. In the before box, cotton and corn depleted the soil. The children know this information. We have already learned about it. We're having discussions about it. Then we fill in our before box. Let's jump to the after box, boys and girls. After George Washington Carver caused the change, what were the crops like? Oh, they grew really well. They flourished. And farmers were making money. We fill in that box. After we identify those 2 parts, then we can look at what caused the change. Because when you have the before and after, the change really exposes itself. It makes it more obvious. At that point, we're now talking as a group. What were the key reasons for this change? How did George Washington Carver's discoveries and research cause this change? So notice I'm going back up to this big idea to guide students through this thinking process. This is all about you showing children how to think effectively. At that point, we identified one of his first ideas, and that was crop rotation, using things like sweet potatoes and peanuts and pecans in order to replenish the soil. So not only are you growing something, but you're also using these specific types of plants that replenish the soil. Wow, what a discovery. He realized that you can't keep growing Cotton and corn, they take away the nutrients. So he discovered that there are certain plants that you can actually grow, you can eat, and they replenish the soil using this idea of crop rotation. So the students and I are talking, and they identify that. Once they identified that he had the peanuts and he had the sweet potatoes, he had to come up with products so that people would want to buy those types of plants. And that was the next part of George Washington Carver's discoveries, is when he came up with different ways to use a peanut, different ways to use sweet potatoes. And we identified those as key reasons that caused this change. At that point, we have our 3 key reasons: crop rotation, and then taking those crops, those new types of crops that farmers didn't traditionally grow, and come up with many different products they can use for, so the public would have a need for those products and buy them. Which leads us to the after box. We have crops that are flourishing because the soil is being replenished, and farmers are selling those crops and making much money. After we orally rehearse all this information, we go back to the conclusion. And in the conclusion, what are we doing? We are using the secret formula, S light bulb, which means I'm repeating that big idea, but I'm using different words. I'll go back up to the S, the subject, George Washington Carver. Is there another way I can say George Washington Carver? We decided to say this famous American. Then we went up to the big idea. His research, discoveries impacted farming. And we decided that affected the lives of people every day. That his work affected the lives of people every day. After that, take out a red pen and say punctuation time. We can go back up to our paper and actually mark all the punctuation. We have around 1914 in the southern United States of America. What word did I start with? Around. So I want to make sure that I capitalize that A, and I remind myself to start that with a capital. Around 1914 in the southern United States. So I'm going to put S and US so I can remember that I have to capitalize those words. I will then put a comma. I will underline and also mark the letters in George Washington Carver to remind myself that I have to capitalize those. Around 1914 in the southern United States, George Washington Carver's research and discoveries forever changed Americans' diets and agriculture. Ooh, I'm going to put Americans. I've got to make sure that I write Americans here with a capital so that I remember that I am going to have that as a capital. And finally, I put my period. Next, I go to the next sentence. So I'm going to the before box, and I'm going to orally rehearse this, put my key starting words, put my periods, and I'll go through each box and I'll put the punctuation in each one. As I'm orally rehearsing the before box, I'm reminding myself that we're talking about before the change. So I could start this sentence with before Carver changed farmers' lives, or I could just start with at that time, because I'm talking about what it was like at that time before the change. I think I'll start with at that time. I'm going to write at that time to transition me into the before part, and I'll put a comma. So I'm going through and I'm orally rehearsing this, and any transitions that I use, I'm going to mark them on my paper. At that time, most farmers grew cotton and corn, which depleted their soil and profits. I'll put a period there. I'm finished with my sentence. I go through each one of these sentences. I mark the transitions if I need to. I put the punctuation in. In the next sentence, when I go to the change, I am just asking myself, who or what is this sentence about? It's about George Washington Carver. What did he do? He thought of crop rotation as one of the solutions to help farmers with their depleted soil. I could start with a transition signpost word or phrase, but this time I'll just use his name, Carver. the subject of the sentence. You don't always have to have transitions. So I'm going to write Carver here to remind myself that's how I'm going to begin the sentence. I'm going to, again, read this sentence over and over, practice how I'm going to say it, and then mark any punctuation or put key words I need in order to remember how I formed that sentence. After marking my transitions, keywords that start sentences, and the punctuation, the students and I will orally rehearse this entire paragraph repeatedly, and not in a memorization sense. We are orally rehearsing it so that we are looking at the information and constantly revising these sentences over and over. I'm also going to make sure that I lower my voice through this rehearsal, and eventually I stop using any voice whatsoever, and the students only are reading the organizers. So they are reading these organizers over and over and over again, getting to those real deep levels of thinking, mastering the ability to say this information in an academic way. And when I walk around, I'm listening to them. Students who have this information under control, they can easily say it. Then I give them a piece of paper to write it out. They're orally speaking as they write it out. You don't want them to stop talking. Every time they write, you want them to keep saying it. They could just whisper it, but you want them to stay connected with that oral language rehearsal. Talk, 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 practice how I say it. It sounds pretty good. Now I'm going to write it, and I'm going to keep talking as I write. It will keep that fluency in there. It will help them stay focused on, is what I'm writing making sense? And also will make them go back to the organizer and keep using it. Some children fill in an organizer and don't even refer to it. You want them to keep going back, rehearse, rehearse. Sounds pretty good. Now I start saying that sentence and I write it out. It's critical that they do many rehearsals. Children who are second language learners or slow progressing may need to be pulled at this point in a small group with you, where you and they together will orally rehearse this piece over and over, and where you will help them clarify the information as well if needed. So there's our George Washington Carver cause and effect, using social studies in this sense. On page 156, we have a blank rectangle in which we are going to do another cause and effect analysis. And the reason why I'm showing you this is I wanted you to see how on page 157, we use social studies for cause and effect. On page 156, I'm going to use cause and effect during my language arts time. Cause and effect is a deep level of thinking. It's not for any particular subject. It's for you to analyze information that you know well at a deep level to identify reasons, events, or issues that caused a change. In this case, I'm going to show how, after reading a story, the students and I together identified why there was change in the story. So we're using our cause and effect thinking in order to reach that deep level of analysis. The story that we had read is called The Waterfall, and the author of that story is Jonathan London. After reading The Waterfall, I'll say to the children, boys and girls, let's take this story now that we know it so well, and let's really analyze it at a deep level. So we need to make our organizer to guide us through that thinking, our cause and effect organizer. We go over to our paper, we draw a top line, a bottom line, and 2 lines in the middle. The top part is our introduction. The middle part is our body. The bottom part is our conclusion. Introduction, body, conclusion. We have it. Let's go to our introduction. That's going to be a topic sentence. What's our secret formula? S, light bulb. In the body, we are going to show cause and effect. Let's use our hand sign, our memory device, to help us remember what needs to be in the middle. Before, after, what caused the change. Let's label our 3 boxes. Before, change, after. Go to the conclusion. What do we need at the conclusion? Our secret formula, S, light bulb. There were many changes in this story. But one of the key changes that I think we should identify is when the father was talking about how climbing up the waterfall was impossible. So let's go and analyze that for change, because we learned at the end of the story it wasn't impossible to climb that waterfall. So let's identify the reasons that caused that change. So first we'll go to the subject. Who caused that change? It was really the older boy. So we're going to put older here, the older boy in the family. And what did he do? He caused a change. He made the impossible happen. Oh, instead of saying the older boy caused change in the story, we're going to say he caused change, but we're going to tweak that a little bit and say he made the impossible happen. So we'll write the keyword impossible here and happen. That's a clever way to say change, because the word happen is dealing with change. Something impossible happened. Now we go back and we will orally rehearse this. The older boy made the impossible happen. Let's go to the setting. Do we need a time? Do we need a location? And in this case, we should say that during a camping trip, so I'm going to use the word during, and then I'm going to just put like a tent there so I can remember camping trip. During a camping trip out in the wilderness, I think I'll put that. And I don't need to say when this happened. If I want, I could maybe put a sun up here like one day during a camping trip deep in the wilderness, the older boy of a family made the impossible happen. We have our big idea. We have our topic sentence. Where are we going? We're going to go to the body. And what do we need to do in the body? We need to analyze what caused the change. What were the reasons, events, or issues that caused the impossible to happen? So notice I keep going back up to that big idea to guide the thinking. Well, let's look at what happened before the change. Before, when it seemed like it was impossible. So at that point, we'll go to where were we in the story where it identified that it was impossible to climb that waterfall. So now we'll have the dad and the boys were hiking. They saw this big waterfall. What did the dad say? No way, end of the road. It's too dangerous to climb that waterfall. So we had our before. What are we going to label next? The after box. And in the after, we now are at the waterfall and the entire family has climbed the waterfall. So all four of them are up there. So we have before, the two boys and the dad are hiking and they see this beautiful waterfall and the boys want to climb it. And what does the dad say? End of the road, no way, that's too dangerous. Then we go to the after, and in the after, the entire family's at the top of the waterfall. What are we going to fill in? What caused the change? What were the reasons to get them from, there's no way we can climb this waterfall, it's impossible, to all four of them are at the top of it. At that point, the students and I are analyzing that story. And the first thing we came up with was the next day, after they had gone on that first hike seeing the waterfall, they saw a paw print from an animal, a wild animal that was near their tent. And they also, and I'm going to put like a little ear here, heard rustling in the bushes during that evening. And what happened was the older boy's heart started to pound and get excited the same way he felt when he saw the waterfall. So this event caused him great excitement, and he wanted to feel that excitement again. He wanted to go see the waterfall. The next event that led to the change was when the two boys, the dad finally let the two boys climb up the ledge towards the top of the waterfall, telling them to be careful. The younger boy was frightened, but the older boy said, and I'll put some eyeballs here, don't look down, so we'll cross out those eyeballs. So the older boy was excited, wanted to go see the waterfall and climb it. Talked his dad into letting his brother and he climb. They were very careful, climbing up the waterfall, stepping on ledges that were wide enough and gripping in cracks of the rock as they climbed up to the top. And the older boy made this impossible happen by having a safe way to get to the top and also telling his brother, don't look down, it'll scare you. The third event that caused all of them to get up to the top was when the mother and father started climbing, and the older boy directed them, told them the safe way to get up the rocks to the top. And finally, we have the entire family at the top. So we have these key reasons here that it directly affected them, making the impossible happen, where the entire family reached the top of the waterfall. Finally, we'll go to the conclusion. So we have the older boy. How can we say that differently? This brave young man. Let's not say boy. Up there we said boy. Let's say young man. Notice I'm choosing a specific noun that's going to tell you even more. Instead of saying boy, I'm saying young man. Giving more meaning and telling you that I think much more of this young man. He's brave. He's acting older. He is showing that he's like a man more than a boy. So this brave young man, and we have up here, made the impossible happen. What's another way to say made the impossible happen? This brave young man, instead of saying that made the impossible happen, made his dream come true. So I'm going to just put the word dream here. I go back. I'm going to orally rehearse this with the kids. We will mark our punctuation, our capitals, our commas, our periods as we orally rehearse it. They will then orally rehearse with their buddies at their table. When they can control the language, they are ready to write it out. And I hand them lined paper so they can start writing it out. This activity is for you to use, again, when the children know information really well, and now they're ready to analyze the information at a deep level. And this analysis is cause and effect, to identify change, the reasons, events, or issues that cause that change. And you can't do that unless you know the information really well. You can't analyze it. What makes this so exciting is that you have a very specific direct instruction way to guide students through this thinking process. You're not just hoping that they get there. They have these steps. And as I showed you, we used social studies, we used a literature story. This is something that you can use in any of your core areas, in any core subjects, to identify change. It's just a thinking tool. And that's what's really critical, that once the students understand this, they can apply this thinking to any information they come upon. I hope you enjoy this activity and use it well.